Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, folks. Welcome to this episode of All Things Policy. Rijesh and I are sitting in the podcast studio, and we have an interesting topic to chat about. We want to talk about the scope for international collaboration in space technology. Rijesh and I both work in the high tech geopolitics program at the Takshashila Institution. How are you today, Rijesh?
I'm doing very well. Ashwin. Thank you. And this is an exciting topic, obviously. We've been discussing this on and off for a while. So let's get started.
Yes, this is that the reason that this conversation finally turned into a podcast is because the US recently liberalized some of their export control rules related to certain space technology. So now they have enabled the sale of certain space technology parts from their commercial industry to players outside the US, which is a really interesting development. This was surprisingly long overdue. They hadn't done this for a while, and this was being asked for a while. But given their burgeoning industry, it's no surprise that they have done it now. And so we thought, why not take this a step further?
Hey, can I ask a question before that?
Yeah.
So I had two questions actually. One is when you say they've relaxed export controls now, does that mean now that India can buy rockets and boosters directly from, say, SpaceX?
No, some of the more strategically key parts of the space technology, brochure is more limited to certain countries that US has very strong ties with, say Canada or UK,
Okay.
and all that. But India is included in the second tier of they have a 3-tier structure, and the second tier where they have many countries that they have friendly relations with, excluding the adversarial ones. Obviously, India has been listed there, and we can buy many of the things there, but it's restricted to more like software applications, services, and satellite services and things like that.
So we still can't acquire cryogenic engines, for example.
No, we can't.
Good to know.
Yeah.
So and the second thing I wanted to ask, you said it's a big move that they allowed. So what was the industry structure like beforehand? Right? What was the space structure like beforehand?
I think this whole regulatory system has been dominated by the Cold War and the post-Cold War era, and they were pretty restrictive, and that holds true for space technology across the globe in each country. Any country which has any significant space technology capability under its wing will play a protective game. They don't want to think of space as a trade. They don't want to think of space as a business, until recently at least. And it's more about it's a military capability that they want to develop and hold and keep it to themselves without revealing to anyone else. Even during the Cold War era, there was a lot of the whole espionage scene was dominated by a lot of technology secrets, space secrets among them, and so that mindset has lingered, and the reflection of the same has tainted the regulatory landscape as well. That is true in the US. That's true for many countries, and now we see a liberalization drive across the world. Many countries are doing it in different ways at different points of time, India included. But I would say we are at different stages of this transition.
Okay. So do you think that now that they've eased off export controls, so do you think this is like this will converge to space industry also turning into some kind of a globalized supply chain, or do you still think that there will be small cohort like US, Japan, and close allies will create their own supply chain, and everybody else will get left? How do you see it building?
Well, personally, I think space turning into a global supply chain, space technology turning into a global supply chain is inevitable. When it will happen is the question. At some point, it has to become a global economy kind of a domain where there is trade, there is specialization, and there are parts of the value chain that some players are able to do better than others, and all the benefits that come with it. And this is necessary because that's when it's going to be sustainable economically. Even now, if you see, a lot of the customers for space services are governments themselves,
Mm.
because one is in part because the benefits of space are so distributed that it makes sense for the government to be the customer that reaps the benefits, because it's commercially it's a harder business to crack.
Mm.
But the other angle is that the regulatory system has been set up in such a way, the mindsets, the political will is leaning in such a way that it is restricted. But given how much we have broken out of this mindset and this old way of thinking already in the last, say, 2 decades, it is going to continue, moving away from that and turning similar to many other domains of the economy where free trade reigns supreme.
Well, that's kind of interesting. See, so to me, one of the reasons why the government is the predominant customer is because the truly commercial use cases have not been fairly obvious until recently. I mean, like now you might say Starlink has shown that there is telecom services. They all are mapping, GIS based mapping. So there are commercial use cases coming up now, right? But for your vision of a truly globalized supply chain, we need a lot more like commercial use cases. Like exploration to Mars is not a good commercial use case, right? Because that's actually a zero sum game. Whoever gets there first has a huge advantage. So that's not likely to drive a commercial. So what kind of use cases do you think exist where you might see like the need for a globalized supply chain?
Use cases that will impact the lives of a layperson during their everyday lives is what is going to bring this about. And to do this, you need a convergence of various technologies reaching a certain stage of maturity, which then leads to this effect on the whole. To give you an example, I think the satellite communication and satellite internet is a great example. And a lot of things came together which led to the emergence of these mega constellations that we are seeing come up all around us. And so I'll list a few of those things. Firstly, it's advancements in satellite communication antennas and technology. They were miniaturized, receivers were miniaturized, and that enabled even a car to have a small antenna on the top and then receive data from the satellite. So that is probably one of those things. Second is just the demand for consumption of the internet, because now there's a lot of the economy exists on the virtual sphere, not the physical world, and as a result many people use the internet so much more, and which necessitates the access to internet being a requirement for a lot of these people, which they're willing to do and willing to pay a premium for something like satellite internet. And then you have SpaceX, which mastered the art of reusing their rockets, which greatly reduced the cost of access to space. And so because of that one key piece of technology that they mastered, they are now able to send a lot of satellites at one go for very cheap, all the way to orbit and set up these constellations. They have over 6,000 satellites already, and they wouldn't have worked maybe 20 years ago when each rocket was going up there, dropping off its payloads and just burning up, and then you had to build a new rocket to go again.
Correct. Yeah.
So similar convergences will happen. When we have space technology is calling it space technology and thinking of it as one monolithic sector is very misleading, because a lot of things have to come together: cybersecurity, AI, IT, and material sciences, and so many fuels, and so many things have to come together too. And I think a lot of them are already at play. And as more of these synergies build up and suddenly make something more commercially viable, something more cost effective, then suddenly there will be military applications that can suddenly turn into a commercial business opportunities which corporations are sure to exploit.
Okay, that is interesting. I mean, I personally I think for a global supply chain to emerge out of this, right, you really need space is still when people think of space, people are still thinking about, deep space exploration and, Voyager 1, 2, and now Elon Musk going to Mars. But that's not and like you were pointing out, the satellite constellations that give you telecom bandwidth is one simple use case. But I personally like the whole Jeff Bezos model of build space infrastructure so that 100 years from now, there will be a space-based economy. I don't know, maybe you're doing asteroid mining or you're capturing water from who knows what kind of use cases out there. So that is an interesting use case. And if you think about it from that perspective, it makes sense that you want most of the countries participating in a supply chain so that everybody can explore multiple use cases, right? But the fact is we're not there today. Like, the US has an overwhelming advantage in it. And there's no logical reason today for them to open up.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So given that, how do you think it will actually play out? How will such a supply chain build out over the next 5, 10, 15 years?
One thing that US has to concede is that if they're going to stay hell-bent on preserving the whole supply chain within their national borders, and they're going to continue insisting on doing that, then they are essentially forcing their corporations and their players within the country to play this game at a premium. From everything from labor to land to resources is going to be a challenge, and they will not be able to scale as much as they would like to. Going ahead, they are losing access to cheap labor, to more favorable launch locations, to allow themselves and their allies to develop specializations in certain sectors so that innovation can happen parallelly instead of doing the whole thing single-handedly. And there is definitely benefit for the US to do this, and understandably, space is a dual-use technology and dual-use domain, so there will be a lot of reservations about just opening it up to the world as it is. But I think so. Let's say Chinese investments into US space companies will probably not be allowed anytime soon. But at the same time, there are already trade blocks and allied blocks within the geopolitical landscape, which you can bring into the picture. So the US can possibly explore alliances and collaboration in space technologies with some of its key allies, which already have certain space technology, so that they don't feel like they're like, it's not a zero-sum game for them. They are going to get something back from these allies. Some easy names that come to mind are Japan, India, South Korea. And one of the key reasons why the US doesn't do this already is because a rocket can be repurposed to an ICBM very easily, and they don't want to give that away, which is understandable. But these three nations that I mentioned already have some space capabilities. India already launches its own rockets, for instance. Japan and all of the countries are already part of the missile technology control regime, so they are already part of the club, so to say. And this should give a platform that can create trust and create meaningful collaborations, which these countries are already doing. In fact, India is building the lander that Japan will put its rover on and eventually launch to the moon. So if they are collaborating on such a strategically important mission already, that means there's already some level of trust between these governments and the space agencies.
Right.
The US is also doing a bunch of things, independent space projects with all different nations combined. And the minute you see something on the cutting edge, you see countries leaning on each other, which I think lends to the whole of space as a whole, because you need that collaborative mindset to make things possible within realistic timelines. And for a global space economy, that's exactly what you would need, because you can't be the producer and consumer and keep it all within national borders. Even when you finally build up infrastructure, let's say around maybe an orbital reef or asteroid mining, you can't really enforce the geographical borders that you have on Earth there. And so it is much better to have a more open and a collaborative environment where your corporations will benefit, and government can always have its own strategic domain where it does things on its own without, and the cutting edge as well, or the milestones, the big milestones that we have, you would want countries to do it independently to an extent, and they can continue doing that. But at least the Earth space where there is a lot of potential for commercialization. There's a lot of, and so then why not let corporations tap into synergies, work together?
See, but again, so the interesting question that occurs to me there is, obviously there's still going to be competition with the Chinese, because clearly they are building out their own capabilities, and presumably they'll want their own international supply chain of their own allies, right? So this turns into not a nation to nation race, but let's say two groups racing against each other. So from an Indian perspective, yes, the US is our ally and China is not our ally. Does it make sense to commit to one or the other group right away? Or should India hedge its bets and say, we have our own program, we'll continue developing that. We are, anybody who wants to come here and manufacture can manufacture. What do you think India should approach it as?
I think they should approach it as approach it on a case by case basis. So maybe it makes sense for India to pick a side when it comes to, say, space situational awareness, and say that they want to collaborate with the US for better maritime domain awareness, or any of that, any of the things. But then they also have possibilities to collaborate with Russia and China on something on the moon, let's say. And so India should be in a position where it can make these decisions independently of each other. And because that way of looking at space is important, because you're basically bifurcating and you're looking at your priorities and your end goals with each of these different things independently, and it is independent, because the end results and the consequences of these projects in space are vastly different from each other. And I think as long as India is in that position where it can independently choose for itself, I think we are good.
And under ISET, right? There's already activities happening between the US and India, where some of our private space companies. Do you think that that's going to be the model, where it's going to be less ISRO but more our private companies getting to participate in, say, the US supply chain? Or do you still think that ISRO will be the one leading the charge if India does get to collaborate on these kind of supply chain models?
I think there will be collaborations happening at the NASA ISRO level for
which is already happening.
All of these milestone-based missions that you spoke about.
Yeah,
that will continue to happen. But more Earth-focused economies will be, I think, driven by corporations. And a lot of these startups in India are positioning themselves for this. They are building their value around offerings which would benefit, say, US contracts, or that's the model that they're going for. Because right now the funding, the money, it's where it's at is in the US. So that is where they're building at, and so that I think that will continue. But there will always be a higher level of collaboration between ISRO and NASA that will continue to and like ISRO has already stated its intentions to just focus on the strategic and the cutting edge research based missions. They're not going to play in the commercial sector anyway. Even if they are, it's going to it's going to be NCIL that is going to do that. So yeah,
interesting. That's kind of cool. Anything else we are missing in this conversation? I don't know if there's a dimension that we have not thought about.
I think one dimension worth highlighting is translating intentions into results. There is already a recognition of the need to think this way about strategic technologies among India, the US,
correct,
and Japan, and we have regularly had ISET summit level meetings, and in the India US critical and emerging technologies framework, they mention space every time, along with many other key technologies. And so it is obviously driving change at the level of policy. But until we see things like these emerge out of them, maybe it will take months, maybe it will take years.
Correct.
But until we see these significant developments have come emerge from these frameworks, we will not really see huge change. And what I have noticed is there is this intention among all of these nations, and they have already, so to say, told each other that they are open to doing this. But it's just that it's a slow process of reforming institutions, thinking, policy, and the whole legal landscape that can allow for this to happen, and allow it in such a way that interests are safeguarded, IP is protected, secrecy is maintained, and all of that. I think as long as they do it in a focused manner and they continue to work towards it gradually but consistently, we can be optimistic of seeing something in the coming years.
Cool. Yeah, this is really interesting, Ashwin. I mean, I'm glad we're doing this conversation because I think it's, like it seems like, as they say in Star Trek, right, the final frontier. So it does seem like that. So it'll be very interesting to see how this all plays out, and how. I mean, like you said, I agree with you. Ultimately, nation states should not be building commercial activity in space. That should eventually be the domain of private enterprises who will try stuff, experiment, fail, and ultimately find ideas that actually generate value. And I agree with you. I don't think that each country doing it makes sense when you think about commercial activity in space. So hopefully, like you said, as we slowly iron out things in using ISET or whatever other tools that we have today, we'll figure out a way for like global supply chains to develop in this area.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rijesh. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.